Thanks, Donna. Green.
All right, well, it's 7 o'clock, so welcome everyone back to our 50th anniversary Pilgrim at Tinker Creek read along. This is our second session. Once again, it's wonderful to have you all here with us. We had a really great series of discussions last time, and I'm excited to see where it all goes today. So today's overview, our guest guide is Suzanne Thornley, and we'll be discussing chapters 4 through 6. Pictured here, we've got the Polyphemus moth, a main character, I think, of chapter 4, was it? And I tried to find the male one with the really cute fuzzy antenna over here. They're just really adorable and beautiful wings. So a quick introduction to Miss Suzanne Thornley. She moved to the Roanoke Valley in 2010 from her home state of West Virginia. She loves exploring and hiking the trails of the Blue Ridge. She's a retired clinical social worker, and loved the work of helping different populations struggling with mental health and life transitions. She loves reading both fiction and nonfiction, is engaged with nonprofits in the Roanoke area, and enjoys time with family and friends. So welcome, Suzanne. Thank you again, and I'll hand it over to you. Oh, really quick, sorry. I wanted to quickly go over some of the themes that emerged from last week's readings. These are Suzanne's notes, so thank you very much for these. Made a little word cloud here. If that's legible enough for everybody, maybe I'll continue doing that for the coming weeks. But some of the main ones we had were the natural world, the beauty and horror, which if I recall is going to be a pretty major theme this week as well. Seeing the ineffable, the mystery. And yeah, so Suzanne, if you'd like to take it away, please go ahead.
Okay, and thank you, Natalia. Thank you so much for setting up the slides for me. And I want to welcome everyone tonight to the second gathering as we delve deeper into Pilgrim at Tinker Creek. I'd like to kick us off by just giving a nod to Tom Gardner last week. He did such a great job of setting the structure, kind of her process, going through the seasons, and I was really inspired by the conversation and the brilliance of him and the brilliance of the audience. So we'll kind of see where we go tonight as we move into chapters 4, 5, and 6. As Natalia said, I took some notes last week and looked at these themes, and I'd like for you all in the room and outside the room to take a look at that and just chime in if you see anything or want to make any additions to those themes. I tried to cover as many as I could, but I'm sure there's might have been a few that I missed. So if anybody wants to chime in.
Anybody that's here virtually, please just unmute and go right ahead. It's a conversation, so.
It sure is, and I welcome interruptions, and because I'd really like for this mostly to be led by you guys, for sure. So as we move through the night tonight with chapters 4, 5, and 6, I would like for us to just, I know there are a lot of themes there, but let's just kind of keep those in mind as we move forward. So tonight we're going to take a look at chapter 4, chapter 5, each with a quote, and then I'm going to spend more time on chapter 6 around the present and roll in a little bit of mindfulness practice and how I see her as being kind of a natural mindfulness practitioner. And we'll talk more about that when we get to chapter 6. So let's go ahead and pull up the quotes for the slide for chapter 4.
Sure. And if you don't mind me jumping in really quick, Suzanne, I guess as we'll be continuing our discussion, I'm sure you all took notes as you read as well, but well, thinking about themes that emerged, and as per last week, any notable passages. You all brought up some really interesting ones, a number that I highlighted myself too. And here, I don't know if you can see the little caption, but we've got yet another main character of our chapters this week, the praying mantis egg sac. I don't know how to pronounce the word for this particular thing. Does anybody know? It's an Uthica. Uthica. That's like the official name for it. Does anyone know how to pronounce that?
Do you want to
Close enough, yes.
Okay, do you want to say it, or is that close?
No, that's
good. Okay, that's good. Okay. All right, so let's move on to the next slide. And I'm going to read this one, and then as we get through and move through more quotes, I'm going to ask others to read. But I love this. Fish gotta swim and bird gotta fly. Insects, it seems, gotta do one horrible thing after another. I never ask why of a vulture or shark, but I ask why of almost every insect I see. More than one insect, the possibility of fertile reproduction is an assault on all human value, all hope of a reasonable God. So if anyone would like to kick us off in discussion and think about those themes that we listed earlier, I know it's hard not to have them right in front of you. But if there's anything in this chapter and in this quote that strikes you, please jump in.
The deadliness of fertile reproduction is what gets me.
In relationship
The
to
death of the praying mantis.
of the praying mantis, right? Yeah.
And in so many cases, the death of the one, well, I guess it's always the male that gets it.
That gets it.
That's so interesting.
Thank you. Yeah. Anybody else? I mean, when I think about this one, I think about the horribleness, not so much the beauty. A lot of these are kind of lockstep horribleness and beauty. But reading these passages of the praying mantis after I put the book down, I would go back and think about it. And those images just almost like a little bit of trauma, just kind of kept revisiting. Yeah. Well, the next quote, then we'll move to the next quote that is still in this chapter. Would someone like to jump in and read this one?
If not, we'll go ahead, but just start talking. We welcome you.
Yeah, okay, I'll go ahead and read it. The remarkable thing about the world of insects, however, is precisely that there is no veil cast over these horrors. There are mysteries performed in broad daylight before our eyes. We can see every detail, and yet they are still mysteries. And here surfaces again sort of the mystery that we talked about last week that permeated I think a lot of chapters 1, 2, and 3.
If you don't mind me jumping in, something that really struck me about the these particular sections with her extreme admiration and also disgust with the bugs that she's observing so closely is, we often have a sort of idea about beauty that comes to mind just kind of when we hear the word, like it's a flower, it's, you know, a baby's laughter, you know, just like extremely pleasant things. But beauty can also be a very tragic book, or, you know, a movie with stark imagery that, you know, just really that unsettles you or something like that. And like, it isn't necessarily pleasant. And I think a central theme of these chapters, or at least this one with the bugs, is probably our own mortality, because it's something about the like grossness of the flesh and existence, and like not being able to think your way out of it or separate yourself from that embodiment that like, but is sounded to me kind of what she's getting at. I don't know if I expressed that correctly.
Yeah, you did a beautiful job. And can you say a little bit more of how you see beauty in the horror? You know, you kind of talked about that broadly. Is there a specific about the beauty of the flesh, of the disintegration, of reproduction, or
Well, it's interesting. I wouldn't say that that's my personal concept of beauty, but I think, like, intellectually speaking, I can understand it. Oftentimes, you'll look at artwork that just kind of makes you shudder a little bit, or call something really fast. An example that comes to mind that I find really fascinating is in a lot of illustrated work, like comic books. Is I think the first time I noticed this. There is this very bright pink color that is sometimes used to denote like anxiety or some like attention, like there is something horrible coming, and just as a really interesting color cue. And pink is one of my favorite colors, and in trying to study it and how it's applied in art, it's flesh toned. It calls to mind, you know, softness, but also skin and things like that. So that's sort of just what I think of. I know that's a bit of a tangent.
so it's sort of a paradox in some ways, yeah.
Yes, yes, that's the perfect word. I see Twyla's had her hand raised, so please go ahead.
Hello, good evening.
Hello.
The one thing that I kind of took away from this chapter, and I think even the name of the chapter, The Fixed, and kind of particularly when we read this particular quote that you have up, that there was a certain permanence that she spoke of in this chapter, and certain aspects of the natural world, whether it's fossils or insects or species, that remain unchanged for like millions and millions of years. And I think she spoke specifically of like cicadas and sharks, that, and birds are even kind of a form of dinosaurs. They've adapted over time a little bit, but she had spoke about this permanence or the fixed that I thought was intriguing.
It is, and I love how she lays that out. And I talked with Doug about this early on. I'm also wondering, when I started the book, I wondered the richness of the insects and the richness of everything she'd observed. What might not be in our region now? You know, for example, when I moved here 14 years ago, I saw interesting moths and praying mantis on my property, and now not so much. So I really am not a scientist, I'm not an entomologist, but I don't know exactly about that. But I think I will share just as a short anecdote, which may fit in right now. Sharon and I were talking the other day, and she had a comment about the praying mantis. Would you share that with the group?
I certainly will. Okay. It was interesting that you chose an egg case for the Carolina mantis to show, because I'm certain on reading her description that she's in fact describing the egg case of the Chinese praying mantis.
I think you're
and
right.
I see I have some agreement. Yes. And of course, they were very popular as quote unquote pest control, except they eat everything, including Carolina mantis, being twice their size. So they weren't successful at that, and that's not uncommon for us to think we know better than nature. But what I want to actually move on to is that I started thinking about how much should we care if a quote unquote invasive species is displacing another species? So going on to this idea of impermanence. And I say that even though I'm an avid native plant person, and everything I do every day is about native plants, but I think it's still an interesting discussion that's being had, that, you know, what if that invader is better adapted now, especially with climate change? What if it's more beautiful? Should we turn to that in lieu of the native that it's replacing. And for some reason, it led me to think about that we are probably all the product of some invader somewhere in our own product lines way back when. You know, anybody who's done a DNA test, which I have not, would know that. And so, yeah, we want to appreciate who we are right now, right here. So should we maybe rethink that in the context of the natural world as it changes? Now, please don't report me to my fellow native plant people, because I don't necessarily believe that, but I think it's an interesting discussion to have.
I think it's a wonderful discussion to have, and it might be one of those questions that just sits, you know, that maybe there's not an easy answer to that, but it's a beautiful question to leave tonight, as you leave tonight, to think about that. Yeah, I mean, it's just who deserves to be in place, who was there first, how does that look like, who and what, and yeah.
And it's not like the insect had any control over it being, you know, taken across the seas all over the world.
Right.
Whatever, you know, crate they're on because of whatever plants or animals are there. So they have absolutely no control over that. It's a small planet we live on, you know, it's like, was it meant to be? I mean, we think of native, what's native here, but
Mhm.
that's changing so rapidly.
That's.
I mean, she does sort of address that with the starlings in one of the previous chapters from last week, correct?
Yeah, she does, and yes.
And does it have to do with what happens in terms of the balance that
Mhm.
once something comes in, then the balance shifts?
Yeah.
Yes.
But like the stink bugs that we had years ago, you know, all of a sudden we have these awful insects, and what happened?
Yeah,
They're almost gone.
yeah.
At the time, they said there weren't any birds that would eat them, but
I think the wasps.
Wasps took over.
Learn
Yeah.
to eat them.
Oh,
No?
interesting.
so I
Yeah.
think, you know, anytime something comes in, the
It
balance shifts.
Right.
But then sometimes it goes back.
Mhm.
And does that mean it shifts in a bad way? You're welcome, Miss. Oh, I'm glad you're here. Yeah, there's clearly a shift, and one thing we do know that nothing's permanent, you know, nothing stays the same forever. And so this is just a beautiful study to look at what she saw, what was in front of her. And I'm hoping that we will be able to do a field trip and spend some time out on Tinker Creek and maybe have some experts that will help us understand maybe the
Some
shift.
plans are in the works.
Oh, good.
We'll give those details out when we have something more concrete, but yeah, we're definitely hoping to do that. If you wouldn't mind, we've got a few people with their hand raised here on Zoom. Jane's been waiting very patiently. I'd love to give her a chance to speak.
Yes, please.
Well, really, this doesn't have anything to do with the insects, but it is one of the passages that came to my attention. It is in the middle of the part about mantises, but it's now that I can see the egg cases, I'm embarrassed to realize how many I must have missed all along. And I'm wondering if that isn't just also addressing how we go through life. Because when, you know, if you hear a new word, suddenly you hear it everywhere. Or if you become aware of new food, everybody's eating it. And so if we're not paying attention, then how much are we missing if we're not focusing on something? So that was just what I liked best about the mantis thing, more than reading about how the female eats them.
That passage stood out. Oh, sorry.
No, I was just gonna say thank you. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry. The disconnect a little bit between Zoom and in person. Sorry. I just wanted to say thank you, Jane, for bringing up that passage, because that was one that really struck me as well. Especially in my own experience, starting outdoor gardening in the last couple of years. I don't know if I suddenly have a wider variety of beneficial and native insects because of, you know, my interest in permaculture, or is it just that I can identify them more and I can see better? And I think it was somewhere around that section that Jane mentioned where Annie Dillard laments a bit about not having the expert knowledge necessary to truly see all the little details. I wish I had the quote in front of me. Really quick,
Did anyone- Yeah.
sorry, were you speaking to, I apologize, I didn't hear anything via the Zoom call.
No, that's fine. I was just asking if anybody could put their finger on that, and there are people in the room kind of looking for that. You know, and along those lines, while people are trying to find it, if not, we'll move on, but she's such an astute observer and still kind of in the back of her mind, like, whoops, sorry, I missed that, or I didn't see that. And I guess the deeper we move into observation, the more opportunity we have to practice and observe more.
Ben Bezek's also had his hand up for a little bit. Thanks so much for waiting.
No worries. I really don't have anything, but I thought there was a really nice chat by Bess, and I don't know if Bess wants to read that out, or Susan, perhaps you could read it. But I thought it was nicely put. We've been sort of talking about this, but I thought it was well put.
Oh, thank you for pointing that out. It hadn't come up on my thing.
Yeah.
I can go ahead and read it.
I'd be glad for you to share it. I just put it out there for everyone. Thanks. Thanks, Ben.
Thank you.
So for anybody that's not looking at the chat, Bess writes, this chapter made me wonder that nature doesn't have morality, the way our self-consciousness demands morality because we are aware of our deaths. Nature moves on from birth to life and life to death. Nature thrives to that drumbeat. We interrupt the drumbeat with our self-awareness. That's so beautifully put. I think that's sort of what I was clumsily attempting to get at earlier. You've written it perfectly.
That's so poetic. Thank you, Beth. That is just lovely. And we'll kind of revisit that a touch when we get to chapter 6. So yeah, thank you for that. And thank you, Ben.
Should I move on with the slideshow?
For pointing that out. Yeah, so let's see. Let's move on to chapter 5, page 75. Would someone in the room like to read this one? For someone on Zoom?
I will if nobody else will.
Thank you.
But it occurred to me that I could no more catch spring by the tip of the tail than I could untie the apparent knot in the snake skin. There are no edges to grasp. Both are continuous loops.
I just thought this was lovely, and I loved that she noted she did not want to miss spring. And so she's watching and she's waiting, and then she realized like the grass came up, like, like whoops. And in this is a very short chapter, but she gives us again a glimpse into her own mind and how her mind works, you know, and I thought that was just very interesting to read her words as she's posited. And this is also an example of like in the structure of the book, now we're moving towards spring. You know, there's a little hint that now she's watching for spring and we're coming into spring. Does anyone want to comment on your observations of how her mind is working, or anything that strikes you about her humor, her brilliance? She just has such a beautiful capacity to cover so many ranges of study and insights and kind of questions herself.
I mean, the whole chapter is just like one big metaphor, and it's amazing how she like starts in this place and then like comes back to it again, and just that whole idea of the, you know, the knot that you can't untie. And like you say, you know, she goes in and out of 12 different subjects, you know, while still holding that together, right? It's just mastery.
I think it is mastery.
It is very interesting. I really appreciated last week learning from Tom Gardner some of the background on how she put the book together. And I had been previously unaware that she had like, what was it, like 1,000 notes or like note cards that she then sort of collaged together almost. and her stringing the various like metaphors together to create a very broad or create meaning around a very broad concept that can be difficult to grasp with just a single anecdote. I thought that was a very interesting and illuminating sort of bit of a bit of background that it makes a lot of sense how she's able to do that.
And that sort of changed how I read back and revisited these chapters, you know, thinking about her and her journals and her note cards and then sorting through them. A very rigorous process, for sure.
Yeah, I was just looking on what I think is your page 75. What we think of as the weather and behavior of life on the planet at any given season is really all a matter of statistical probabilities. At any given point, anything might happen. There is a bit of every season. In each season, green plants, deciduous green leaves grow everywhere all winter long, and small shoots come up pale and new in every season. And I'm thinking about like the structure of the way this writing occurs, and it's very much that way, right? It's like that there's horror in the beauty, there's beauty in the horror. Like, is this not a chronological compartmentalist's story at all? And I think that's part of the magic of it.
And that's a beautiful, that passage beautifully sums that up, doesn't it? Yeah. Yeah, thank you for that. That's lovely. Anyone else want to comment on the continuous loop knot? Annie Dillard's way of thinking and writing.
I don't know why I keep finding like smiley faces in the book, but she keeps making me laugh. I didn't remember it being this funny.
Give us an example of what.
Well, like following on from that same passage, she says, migrating birds head south in what appears to be dire panic, leaving mild weather and fields full of insects and seeds. They reappear as if in all eagerness in January and poke about morosely in the snow.
I agree, Doug. I have laughed out loud so many times. And I think there was something in that first quote, something about a reasonable God or something like that, that just probably 3 or 4 pages, you know, I just find myself getting tickled.
Sorry.
Okay, I'm just want to check the time, make sure we're doing okay. I think we're fine.
We're doing great. Yeah, here's that quote: "An assault on all human value, all hope of a reasonable God."
Oh, okay. Yeah, that was it. I just thought that was just really, really funny.
Oh, it's excellent.
And she continues to surprise us with that.
It was also, at least for me, quite funny reading that, because she's such an appreciator of everything she sees. Like, she really does have a wide range of what she finds amazing, but even she has somewhere where she draws the line.
Okay, does anyone else want to comment on chapter 5 before we move forward to chapter 6? So I'd like to lay out a little bit of groundwork and what my thoughts are as we move into chapter 6. I would like to give us a little more time to focus on the present. And as far as I know, Annie was not a mindfulness practitioner. You know, during about that time, I think there were people that had gone east and learned about Buddhist practices and mindfulness practices and brought them back. When I read and listen to her, she seems to be a natural without necessarily having that training. She talks about God, little g God, and talks about faith and that experience of her life, but she never refers to mindfulness practice or Buddhist practice or like literal practice of meditation. But she does it, you know, she's just as what I think of as a natural. So these next 3 quotes that I've chosen, the first one is about coming into the present. So that's first kind of waking up and how we become aware of what's around us. The second quote that we're going to look at is being in presence, being in the present moment and being really immersed and saturated in the present moment. And then the third one will be looking at awakening the senses and embodying in the body presence. So that we're going to kind of move through that, and then for fun and not too serious, we'll move into a brief, short mindfulness awareness practice, if that's okay with everyone. Yeah, okay.
That sounds
So,
wonderful.
okay, so let's move into onto chapter 6, page 79, coming into the present. Anyone like to read? I'll take it. At my back, the sun is setting. How can I not have noticed before that the sun is setting? My mind has been a slab of black asphalt for hours, but that doesn't stop the sun's wild wheel. I see my coffee beside me on the curb. I smell loam on the wind. I pat the puppy. I watch the mountain. So this is a wonderful example of catching oneself separated from the action of the present moment. And Annie goes on to note that the moment her mind starts to think about her experience and self-consciousness kicks in, then the richness of the present moment fades. And that's a conundrum. You know, that's a conundrum with meditation practitioners, people trying to bring their mind to the present moment, or just embody the present moment and be immersed in it. And the moment we start thinking about it, then it pulls us away from that rich, rich connection. So does anybody have any thoughts on this coming into the present and her way of writing about that and describing it?
I think it's really interesting that when that it's about the puppy, right? It's like she's experienced it with like so many senses, right? Like she's touching and seeing and feeling and I don't know, I love, there's so much in here about her like watching animals and insects and birds, but this is one of the few times so far anyway that she's like touched the puppy, you know?
Yeah.
And I think that that's really, you know, interesting in terms of mindfulness, and then also interesting in terms of her and how she connected.
And I loved how she kept threading the puppy through.
Right.
You know, it wasn't
Pat
just
the puppy.
introduced and she didn't just leave the puppy, you know, at the beginning, and then, you know, the puppy comes back through. Yeah, so thank you for that.
This passage also does seem to circle back to some of the themes that we encountered last week about like the ineffable and seeing, particularly, you know, when what you were attempting to separate oneself from language to take in what is before you, but then that sort of a paradoxical nature of her writing in language to you about this concept.
That's a great observation, because I think it's clear that she's exploring all of that. You know, she talks about self-consciousness and awareness and self-awareness, and she kind of breaks that down. So I think she shares with us again how her mind works in her exploration around being present in the ineffable, like without words. Yeah. Anyone else in the room or on the screen? Okay, let's move to the next one. And I sort of labeled this coming into the present. Would someone like to read?
I'll read.
Okay, thank you.
Um, like any other of the Spirit's gifts, it is there if you want it, free for the asking. What I call innocence is the Spirit's unself-conscious state at any moment of pure devotion to any object. It is at once a receptiveness and total concentration. Where I stood planted, open-mouthed, born, before that one particular canvas, that river, up to my neck, gasping, lost, receding into watercolor depth, and depth to the vanishing point, buoyant, awed, and to be literally hauled away. There are a few live seasons. Let us live them as purely as we can in the present.
Thank you. This passage, I don't want to get all touchy-feely, but I just think it's so beautiful. And these words just, and I read them over and over, and I typed them for the slide, and they're just so tender and rich and immersed in this beauty. And then how she frames this experience that she's remembering from the Tate, or maybe not the Tate, but I don't think it matters. I mean, what matters is she holds and is embodied that experience and shares that with us in such rich language. It just makes me feel tender and chills a little bit and a little tearful. So thank you for reading for us. You did a beautiful job.
Yes, thank you. In terms of the language, personally, as a visual artist, I really appreciated, the mention of canvas, watercolor depth, the depth to the vanishing point. It's very evocative, and I'm fairly certain in my reading about Dillard, I learned that she was also an artist in her own right. She did, I think, a number of like pen sketches and such of nature that she saw, and she was quite good. So it's neat to see that crossover.
Oh, thank you for letting us, I was not aware of that. So she was
I've only seen a
also,
little bit. I need to look into it more.
yeah. Well, almost,
She
I mean,
references Picasso and Van Gogh and
Yeah.
all sorts of artists.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
And I think on her website, she says there were paintings that she made that she donated to somebody, like at their proceeds were donated to a nonprofit. And I remember thinking then, oh, she painted.
Also painted, which, it actually is not so terribly surprising.
Right, sure.
No.
Right.
I mean, there's a lot of crossover in the disciplines, I think, even if maybe they take different motor skill.
A creative, for sure.
Yeah. For next week, I'll see if I can find some of her artwork, and maybe I'll put it in the slides.
Great, thank you. That'd be great.
Yeah.
Does anyone else have anything to say or would like to say anything about this particular passage and how it may have touched you, help you understand her, comment on the beauty of her language?
Well, Twyla's raised her hand, but really quick, just before I give the floor over to her, I see that Katie, is it? Wrote a comment. Yes, okay. I'm so terrible of remembering names, so I'm glad I got it. Yeah, you wrote in the chat, it was interesting how she began multiple paragraphs the same way in chapter 6 with variations of, I was sitting under the sycamore tree, as if she was pulling us/herself back to the present. That's a really interesting observation. I hadn't even noticed that.
There was at least 3, maybe more times where you could tell maybe it was a different moment, and it wasn't even maybe the same sycamore tree, but she chose to start the paragraph the same way, as if she was kind of trying to snap us back into the
Mm.
present. And just the notion that we like the one fellow she quoted that supposedly studied how long you could actually be in the present moment. I
Yeah.
just that's true. Like, because 12 seconds, just like little moments of uh nirvana that are so uh just
They're
sparse.
precious and fleeting, yeah.
So fleeting, so sparse compared to planning for the future and looking at the past. I'd like to
Yeah.
think could be longer than 12 seconds.
Well, that's a great question. I wonder if we can build on that with practice. I would like to think so. We'd have to ask a Buddhist monk about that, but it would be interesting to see, if that actually, that we can build on that
I felt like
capacity.
she was alluding that it was the most exercised and trained of which that could last 12 seconds. The rest of us are stuck at 3.4 or somewhere thereabouts.
Let's get specific, right?
Right.
And I'm not sure, I can't see on the screen exactly, but thank you to the person who had that observation about her starting the paragraph with the sycamore. And again, it's kind of like an invitation to.
That was Katie who was just sharing.
Yeah, thank you, Katie. Thank you for that.
Totally, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Really quick, Twyla, I'm not sure if you wanted to jump in before we move on.
No, I was just going to comment on this particular passage that's the chapter 6, page 83, that anyone that practices yoga, with someone, with a leader or an instructor or someone guiding you, and the very end, when it's Shavasana, when you're kind of doing a guided meditation, this is kind of reminiscent, this flow of language or guiding you through to the present. It just kind of reminded me of that.
I agree. Yeah, I agree. Having that moment where it just kind of washes over. Okay, so now we're going to move to the next slide on page 86. And I titled this section, Awakened Senses and Body Presence. So in this passage, she brings us in to being aware of the senses. Would someone like to read this for us?
Sure, I'll read it. It all floods back to you. Yes, you say, as if you've been asleep 100 years. This is it. This is the real weather. The lavender light fading, the full moisture in your lungs, the heat from the pavement on your lips and palms. Not the dry orange dust from the horse's hooves, the salt sea, the sour coke, but this solid air, the blood pumping up your thighs again, your fingers alive. And on the way home, you drive exhilarated, energized, under the scented, silhouetted trees.
As you listen, did anyone feel any of their senses? Like, were you able to kind of remember the taste of a sour Coke? Or
I love the lavender light fading.
yes, I love that.
Where you're just sitting on a porch somewhere, just letting the darkness fall and watching that light fade away and just listening, not thinking, not expecting anything. And
just watching. And an opportunity again to kind of get out of the thinking chatter that happens in the mind.
Yeah.
I did notice in this passage, because I was looking at it again today, and she hit all the senses but hearing. And I was sort of, I don't know if that was intentional or if she was just kind of like stream of consciousness writing, but I thought she just did such a beautiful job with each one of the senses. But hearing is not in this passage. Desiccated, yeah. Feeling the touch, the heat and moisture, taste, sour coke, smell, scented trees, seeing the lavender light.
I think
Yeah.
I see, is Bess, are you raising your hand? Please feel free to jump in. Sorry. I hope I'm not interrupting, Suzanne.
Well,
I'm just
now
reading
tell me
notes,
if
yeah.
I'm right on this. She was in a movie theater in a whole nother reality, right? The false reality, what we all enjoy all the time, you know? I think that's what I read, that she's in this theater, she's probably watching a Western about the dust on the boots. And then she enters from it's a wonderful world, the cinema, but it's all the removed experience, right? And then she steps into reality. And isn't that one reason her senses are heightened? Is because she's left the movie theater. And, I think we are living in a lot of movie theaters now. And then she's saying that cold feeling of, and the smell, she's leaving the sourness of the inside of the theater. It's just, I'm just going to say something real quick. The wonderful experience of moving from one extremely certain type of environment to another, it does jar the present moment, right? And just throwing this out there, if you've ever heard of Jill Bolte Taylor, she was a neurologist at Indiana University, where I just moved from, Bloomington, Indiana, and she wrote a book called My Stroke of Insight. And it is the first 50 pages of that book, Oprah loved. It's worth the read, because what happens is she had this stroke in a shower and she completely lost her left brain. She lost all language, recognition of numbers, but she said the visual present moment experience so expanded, it was almost like a dreamlike state of constant wonder, which is what we kind of strive to get with our meditations. And you can't go out and have a stroke because you want to have that experience. She recorded and she got language back, but for like 3 months, everything was coming into her only, almost like an animal. No language, no naming, just sensations, which I think Annie Diller does a great job trying to bridge our left brain to our right brain, right? But anyway, that's what it made me think of. When you go from one dramatically different physical experience to another, the present moment kind of leaps at you. Like going to see the Grand Canyon. It like you go, I've seen pictures, and then you see that sucker and you feel like you're gonna fall in. Anyway, thank you for tolerating my collision of thoughts here.
No, it was
a couple of things about your collision of thoughts. I love that. Because it's so just highlighting that gives us an opportunity, right? To think about when we move from when we move out of this room and out onto the street tonight, it's an opportunity to practice a mindfulness practice. Like, what is it like to have been here, chit chat, colors, light, and then we go out on the dark street and it's a different experience. So, if anybody wants to just take a moment when you step out on the street, it's a wonderful opportunity. And she said back in one of these quotes again, it's always there for the asking. You don't have to look very far to find those moments. And the other thing, can you tell me the name of that book again? What was the name of the book? Unmute.
I'm trying to unmute, excuse me. Okay, she was one of the top 100 of Time magazine for this book. The book is called My Stroke of Insight. And honestly, the first 50 pages are sacred, because she really talks about losing this language, and like the tiles in the shower and the water on her face went to a whole different experience. She was, she said she was like one with the universe feeling without the words, just the experience. It's a beautiful thing to read, kind of like what we're reading. Annie trying to describe it with our consciousness. Yeah.
Yeah.
Jill Bolte Taylor, that's her name.
To piggyback on what Bess is saying, so a therapist I know says the people who are living most in the present are those who are suffering from dementia. And that viewpoint helps me a lot when having to deal with people who are suffering from dementia, that they are living only in the present and they do it better than anybody else.
That is a really interesting thought.
And both of these are interesting, right? And for me, there's a piece of that that's enviable. But like you said, you don't want to have a stroke to have that enhanced opportunity, but to read about it and hear about it, or I certainly don't want dementia, but there is something in that essence of the mind shifting, injured, decaying, that you pick up on something, you lose something, but you might be gaining something in that experience.
Or hang out with little kids for a while. They seem to be able to hang in there in the present moment for a pretty long time if they're interested. Yeah.
Well, she refers to that in here somewhere. I think, what was it that, just get with a kid and they'll find what you're looking for.
That was a laugh out loud moment for me.
That was,
Yeah, the caddisfly cases.
yeah, it's that.
Jane, I liked what you were saying about people with dementia. I have some elderly people in my life and some friends that have parents that are going through dementia, but we sort of have this laughing joke. We call them the accidental Buddhists. Like they weren't trying to get there, but they're there, right? Because they are in that moment.
That's a beautiful term. I love that.
Accidental Buddhist, yeah.
Accidental Buddhists. Okay, is there anything else on awakening the senses? That, somebody's green frame came on. I didn't know if they unmuted and had something they wanted to say. John? Maybe not.
Well, I just wanted to piggyback very briefly on, I think it was Bess's point about the changing states. Actually, the Pat the puppy moment at the beginning of the chapter is that, right? Because she's been road tripping, right? Which if you've been in the car for a long time, you know, it's kind of like this hypnotic state where your brain's just totally disconnected from everything you're looking at. You barely pay any attention to the road. And then when you get out of the car, it's just surreal how much your senses are aware of in a way that they weren't before. And it kind of got me thinking how, on the one hand, these technologies that expand what our body should be able to do, whether we're in a car and able to travel this distance or looking at our phone and talking to somebody who's thousands of miles away, it does take us out of our body in some respect. But I do think I'm encouraged that there's like an invitation that like the stepping back in can be like an entry point into something profound even, you know? I don't know. I mean, I think that is a beautiful thing maybe. So
I do. And I think we don't really pay enough attention, but we have entry points all the time. You know, the invitation is there so frequently. And as we're moving through our busy days and all the chatter and distractions and more, right? More and more distractions. It's harder to kind of dial back, slow down, and find that moment of an opportunity to quiet the mind, because the mind is built to chatter. So a lot of people talk about meditation. They go, I can't meditate because all I do is think. Well, that's what the mind does. It generates thought. So meditation practice is just an opportunity to kind of be playful and bring your mind back to the breath or to an object and just be playful with it. So that being said, is everyone up for just trying a little bit of a mindfulness practice? Okay.
Sure.
So I'm going to, again, let's be playful. And as we go through this, you're not going to be asked to share your experience. And if you want to, you're welcome to, but it's not like, don't go into this and think, oh, and then we're going to go around the circle and everybody's going to share. This is just for you to have fun, play with this for a moment. And then if you want to talk about it later, that's fine too. But we'll just start. And if you would like, you can close your eyes or you can just gaze, just have a soft gaze gently down. Now take a minute and think about a slab of asphalt time that you cut yourself off from a sunset, the person sitting beside you, the aroma of brewing coffee or tea, brilliance of an element of nature, a time you were absorbed in inner mindless chatter or distraction, and briefly and gently bring your mind to that distracted moment, noticing how it shows up in your mind and your body. You don't need to linger there too long, but try to generate an awareness of what that disconnect felt like. Now here's the portal and the opening as we shift to an experience in the recent past, sometime maybe in the last 4 or 5 days or sometime today, where you might have been more aware and more engaged. And it could be very simple. The presence of a pleasant aroma, noticing someone's smile, tasting chocolate or something juicy or tart, seeing stars peek through a blackened sky, hearing a sound, perhaps a beloved piece of music, or petting a puppy. As you allow yourself the awareness of moving in to that more recent experience, take a few deep and gentle breaths and see if you can embody the experience. Feeling it and sensing, not thinking about it, but just feeling and sensing it. Be light and playful. And if you can, allow the images to settle without getting into dialogue with yourself. This is not a test. This is not judgment. And we now have a perfect opportunity to just listen to the bells. What beautiful timing. Okay, ready? Let's stay with the bells for a moment.
So lost me. Sorry.
Now, when you're ready, open your eyes and we'll come back into the room. For those on Zoom, I'm not sure you were able to hear the bells, but at 7, I mean, it was as we were moving through this exercise, just getting ready to wrap it up, the church bells started to chime. So it was a nice opening. And I'm assuming you could not hear the bells, is that correct?
No, can imagine them.
Okay, sounds great. So does anybody want to share anything about that experience? What that was like?
I had a distinct feeling of being surrounded by water, like I was floating.
Oh,
I never achieved that at home, so what was the magic? It was your lovely voice, Suzanne.
I have no idea.
How lovely,
Yeah.
I was floating. I was like,
Did you bring that image in? Was it an image of being in water?
not
As I was
intentionally,
walking through,
it was just a
happened.
sensation. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, so. Can you come to my house?
Of course I will. Absolutely. So I guess, just a comment around that, that was uninvited, right? Like you didn't
Right.
invite that.
No.
There was something about the experience that just allowed that to happen. Does anyone on the screen want to share anything about that brief practice?
Sure. It's interesting that you mentioned Suzanne's voice guiding you into a relaxation state. Image-based meditation is often difficult for me only because I have a hard time holding images in my mind. That's just, I guess I'm just one of those people. And but the steady voice, the cadence of it, I had some nice deep breaths.
Thank you.
This is almost embarrassing to share, but I was so soothed that I almost like my body did the twitch to like bring me back. It like it was a jump scare, but you have a very just calming and soothing presence. And I was I don't even know where I was, but I was just kind of muffled there for a minute, just at peace. And then your body is just so interesting how it can react to that. But I literally like did the twitch where I was almost falling asleep, and it brought me right back. So thank you for that. That was
You're
cool.
welcome. And some teachers would say, if you were able to relax, I promise I was not doing hypnosis. So that wasn't happening. But when your body relaxes and lets go like that, your body needs that. Like that's just like you're just kind of allowing yourself to kind of drop off some layers and just move into a more relaxed state. So I'm glad you had a little mini 3.5 second nap.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Anyone else? Well, as we're wrapping up, and I don't want to move too quickly if anybody else has anything else they'd like to say. We have 10 minutes.
Ideas come to anyone, even in the next few minutes. Feel free to add it to the chat, and we can bring it up there, or just jump in. Again, it's a discussion. Feel free.
Yeah, please do, because we're going to do a reading to wrap up, and I mean, it probably seems a little. With your coffee?
No, good to see my call.
Good to see you. We've all read the book, or we've all read these chapters, presumably, and if not, that's totally okay. But as we're together, as we're in this room and we're talking about the present, I just love like these last 3 paragraphs of the chapter. And I thought it might be great to read that as a closing.
And that's chapter 6.
That's chapter 6, and in my book, it's on page 103 and 104. So what I'm going to propose is that I will read the first paragraph, and I would love somebody to read the second paragraph and somebody else to read the third paragraph. So we have kind of a mix of voices, and this way we can all kind of be witness together to her words again, and close the evening out at the end of this chapter. So do I have volunteers? Okay, great. Volunteers for the second paragraph? That one start at my God?
I see Katie Brooks has her hand up,
we have
as
somebody.
well as, oh, both are Katie's.
Okay, are you sure? Okay, so we have the two, so who's gonna start with my God? That's the second paragraph, just so you all know for each other.
I can do that one.
Okay, all right.
And Katie Brooks, did you want to do the last one?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, sounds great.
Okay, here we go. It is sheer coincidence that my hunk of the creek is strewn with boulders. I never merited this grace, that when I face upstream, I scent the virgin breath of mountains. I feel a spray of mist on the cheeks and lips. I hear a ceaseless splash and susurrus, a sound of water, not merely poured smoothly down air to fill a steady pool, but tumbling live about, over, under, around, between, through an intricate speckling of rock. It is sheer coincidence that upstream from me, the creek's bed is ridged in horizontal croppings of sandstone. I never merited this grace, that when I face upstream, I see the light on the water careening towards me, inevitably, freely, down a graded series of terraces, like the balanced winged platforms of an infinite, inexhaustible font. Ho, if you are thirsty, come down to the water. Ho, if you are hungry, come and sit and eat. This is the present at last. I can't pet the puppy anytime I want. This is now, this flickering, broken light, this air that the wind of the future presses down my throat, pumping me buoyant and giddy with praise.
Oh, sorry, Katie, I think you may be muted.
Zoom faux pas. My God. My God, I look at the creek. It is the answer to Merton's prayer. Give us time. It never stops. If I seek the senses and skill of children, the information of 1,000 books, the innocence of puppies, even the insights of my own city past, I do so only solely and entirely that I might look well at the creek. You don't run down the present. Pursue it with baited hooks and nets. You wait for it, empty-handed, and you are filled. You'll have fish left over. The creek is the one great giver. It is, by definition, Christmas, the incarnation. This old rock planet gets the present for a present on its birthday every day.
Here is the word from a subatomic physicist. Everything that has already happened is particles. Everything in the future is waves. Let me twist his meaning. Here it comes. The particles are broken. The waves are translucent, laving, roiling with beauty like sharks. The present is the wave that explodes over my head, flinging the air with particles at the height of its breathless unroll. It is the live water and light that bears from undisclosed sources the freshest news, renewed and renewing, world without end.
Thank you so much, readers, and thank you everyone for being here tonight.
Thank you, Suzanne. Thank you so much for leading us through today's session and for the wonderful guided meditation.
Oh, you're so welcome. Before we wrap up, we still have, a few minutes if there
and we also have a few slides.
Oh, okay.
I forgot already. Sorry about that. I was in the present, as one might say.
There you go.
So I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, I was just going to see if anybody had anything they want to say. I just didn't want to abruptly kind of close, but anything that anyone wanted to say before we move to announcements. Any thoughts, or is there anything in the chat that needs a shout out?
Not at present.
Okay, then let's move on to the next few slides.
All right, well, for our next meeting, we'll be meeting March 4th. Let me double check. I think that's in exactly a week. Once again, 7 to 8:15. And our next reading is just going to be 2 chapters this time, but I guess they're a bit longer. It'll still be roughly 50 pages. We have Spring and Intricacy. Nice, as Suzanne mentioned, nice coincidence that we ourselves are moving towards spring. And as always, we'd love to hear anything that stands out to you. We're still deciding, or rather figuring out, if we're going to have anybody guesting next week. Otherwise, it's going to be me.
That's an opportunity to volunteer. We're self-organized. So if anybody's interested in leading the next session, please let us know.
I realized that the 8th is the last one, and I could not possibly conclude this. No way. I realize that March 4th I'm available if you need somebody.
Excellent. You want to take the next one?
I could and bring in show and tell.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, that would be so wonderful.
Terrific, Rachel. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And I did want to say along those lines, it's really, it's a little unnerving to think about facilitating. I was a little unnerved.
I've never done that before. I'm nervous.
You will be great. And what along with that, my reading was a little more in depth. I had to think about it a little more closely. How does that land in the room and that sort of thing? So I loved having that opportunity, although first I wanted to say no, and then I can't say no to Doug. So yeah, so thank you. It really is. It's a fun experience, and we are community driven, right?
Yeah. And the beauty is that we all read a slightly different book, right? Because we're bringing our own experiences, our own lenses to the reading, and that's why I love the book discussion. Those passages, many of them marked that you pulled out, but I read them differently tonight. And when I go back and read them again, I'll read them differently after our discussion. So thank you.
Oh, that's, yeah. It just, her words and her work just continues to grow and enrich for me. Yeah.
And that individual lens sort of experience does also lend itself to, facilitating the discussions we have here on every week. If someone is potentially interested for some of our later meetings, please don't hesitate to reach out. Again, if you think maybe, Suzanne and Tom are tough acts to follow, everybody has their own knowledge base and lens for reading and interpreting the book. So everybody is welcome and has something valuable to offer.
And it's a fast hour, isn't it?
It is a fast hour. Yeah. Thank you, Natalia, for helping us move forward with the slides and kind of watching the technology. Appreciate that.
No problem. Took some troubleshooting before we started recording, but we got there. Every week we learn a little more. Well, it looks like it's 8:15, so I will bid everyone a farewell for the evening and see you all next week. Thank you again for coming, and thanks again, Suzanne. Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye,
Bye.
everybody. Bye.